Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. We could do it again, but we're not going to do that. I am profoundly saddened and greatly honored to welcome you on behalf of Georgetown University and our McCourt School of Public Policy, along with our colleagues at the Brookings Institution, to a celebration of Alice Rivlin and her remarkable life. I knew Alice for many decades as a Brookings scholar, a policymaker, a city leader, a teacher, and a friend. Alice was not just an amazing policy leader. She opened doors for new leaders and welcomed and supported many of us who followed her through them. Given who Alice became, it's hard to believe how hard even she had to knock on those doors. I think she enjoyed sharing with young people her rejection as a PhD candidate by the government department at Harvard, as they told her in writing they simply did not accept women of childbearing age. And so, alas, we political scientists lost Alice to economics. She told of similarly short-sighted behavior when, on her way to give a lecture outside Manhattan, she was to meet her car at a city university club. Like many such clubs, not so long ago, that club did not allow women and was hard put to find her a place to wait. What better place than the ladies' room? And because she was 8 months pregnant, they had the wherewithal to go the extra step of bringing her a chair because she was 8 months pregnant. No protest, Alice graciously accepted, but boy, did she show them. Indeed, in her graciousness, alongside her powerful intellect, her persistence, and her sharp wit, she showed us all. I worked most closely with Alice in the Clinton administration's health reform efforts. Let's just say they were not our administration's finest hour. Though we contributed mightily to subsequent passage of the Affordable Care Act, as one colleague later noted, by showing the Obama administration just how to do everything wrong. Let me also say, however, let me stipulate that the errors were no fault of Alice's, nor of other Clinton administration people you're going to hear from today. On the contrary, in that truly challenging process in which we policy folks labored pretty hard with very little to show for it, Alice was a much valued presence. I know I always wanted to be at the top of my game when I worked with Alice. She simply expected that, and I never wanted to let her down. I was not alone. As one of my colleagues described that experience, when everyone else had their hair on fire, which was often, Alice was consistently the mind and the voice of reason. When I worked with her, my blood pressure was always lower, my brain more focused, my perspective restored. Alice brought that mind and voice of reason to our students at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown. It is hard to imagine anyone who could better represent the woman or person for others that Georgetown University aims to have our students become. I'm enormously proud to have brought her here, but you tell me, if you wanted to get the best for your students and to build your school's reputation, who would you want on your faculty? For our students, Alice represented in her person the commitment to evidence-based policymaking that is at the heart of McCourt's public policy education. And she had enormous confidence in those students to carry that commitment forward. Alice believed more than I do that evidence and goodwill will carry the day. Evidence just can't beat politics in the public arena. But we profoundly agreed that unless we make sure that evidence has a seat at the table, good policy simply doesn't stand a chance. Alice did more than give evidence a seat. As the founding director of the Congressional Budget Office, she pretty much built the table and put evidence at its head. She created an institution whose job it is to speak truth to power. Speaking that truth was a big part of Alice's career, but she gave me the personal gift of acknowledging that that task is not always so simple. When I was running for Congress in Virginia, I sought her advice about the position I should take on trade policy. I was challenged in meshing what I knew about policy with what I needed in labor union support for my campaign. Troubled as to how to handle this potential conflict, I asked Alice what she thought I should do, expecting to hear some of that hard-to-hear truth. Instead, without missing a beat, Alice looked me in the eye and said, "I think you should win." Rather than judging me as I'd feared, Alice trusted me to find a way to make good policy good politics and was willing to back me 100%, even knocking doors in Loudoun County to tell people why they should vote for me. It still feels great to think that Alice Rivlin had my back. I plan to hold on to that feeling, and in return, I want to offer Alice Rivlin both a thank you and a promise. The thank you is for all she did for the nation, for good policy making, and for inspiring me and many others to be the very best we can. The promise is to continue not disappointing her. I believe I speak for many who knew her and many whom we will encourage to follow us when I promise that we will keep on bringing our evidence, our good judgment, and our humanity to making the world a better place. Alice, we will keep on keeping on.
Judy, that was terrific. I am so glad that the Harvard politics department made that mistake. We gained a wonderful economist in the process. Well, it's a really special honor for me to join Judy in welcoming all of you here today on behalf of Brookings and the many people at Brookings who worked with Alice for so many years. I think you all know about her illustrious career in government, and so I want to focus a little more on her role as part of the Brookings community. She, after all, spent 60 years at Brookings, often leaving to be sure and then returning again after a period of service to the nation or to this city. I think I speak for all of her Brookings colleagues when I say she was an absolute delight to work with. She wrote countless books and articles, contributing extensively, for example, to a series we called Setting National Priorities, and later to another series we called Restoring Fiscal Sanity, something she cared deeply about. She was totally energized and engaged in everything she did. Just days before her death, at least 2 of us at Brookings received messages from Alice saying, in effect, "I can't come to your seminar this week, but please keep me on the list." Her arguments, whether about the federal budget, health care, or some other topic, were always clear and convincing. After you read something she had written, you would say to yourself, yes, I see. Why didn't I think to say it that way? She was also a workaholic and always did more than her share of any assignment. Even in her final days, she was worrying about and writing notes for her latest book. I've read a number of the draft chapters, and they are terrific. So even though we have lost Alice, we haven't lost her ideas. The book, a memoir of her life dealing with various economic challenges, and her thoughts on the need to reform our politics, will be published in the coming year and will be a really fine and fitting legacy to her life. I want to add that when her service to the nation or to the city of Washington, D.C. was needed, Alice always answered the call. My favorite story about this relates to her service on the D.C. Control Board. The newspapers had been speculating about her chairing the board and helping to put the D.C. government on a more fiscally sustainable path. Don Cohn, then at the Fed with Alice, asked her if she was going to take up this very challenging task. She replied, "The two most important men in my life, my husband and Alan Greenspan, are advising against it. But I'm going to do it anyway." She felt it was the right thing to do, and she never flinched from taking on such tough assignments. For the younger generation, Alice was an inspiration. One of her recent research assistants, Will Palmisano, wrote a wonderful tribute to her in which he said in part, quote, "In our daily lives, we should all aspire to conduct ourselves with the grace, humility, and kindness that radiated from Alice." Another colleague, Molly Reynolds, put it even more succinctly. She remarked to me recently, "Why can't we all be more like Alice?" There are many such testimonials from younger scholars, too many to mention, and you are going to hear from 3 dynamic women who women mentored later this afternoon. At a more personal level, I have tramped across countless landscapes and countries with Alice as part of a small hiking group that we call the Trekkers. The group has encountered numerous challenges from lost mules to injuries, knee injuries, and dangerous water crossings. On a hike, Alice was as indefatigable and cheerful in her efforts to get to the end of the trail as she was in finishing her book or completing any other task. It was all about persistence and in recognizing that however bad things got, they could always be so much worse. Her sense of optimism was contagious. We might be wet, cold, and nursing blisters on our feet, but we would go on and find something of value, even in strange and unpleasant places. On one trip to Mongolia, Alice was late for the group's picnic lunch under an outcropping of rocks. What did she do? Enterprising as ever, she found a Mongolian with a horse. He brought her to the picnic, a kind of Mongolian-style Uber in action. In recent years, Alice has harped on the need to find compromises in areas like the budget and health care. She has never given in to the pessimism on this score that so many others have. She fiercely believed in compromise and in finding bipartisan solutions. She even wrote a piece on how to create Trump care and said she could make it really great. In the end, like so many of us, I am greatly saddened. I have lost a friend and a colleague. I will miss her very much. But the country has lost a person who still had confidence in America's ability to transcend our differences. If we can learn to trust one another enough to get something done, her efforts will not have been in vain. We should try to do better. We owe her that much. I will leave you with that thought, but I also want to thank all of you for being here. I know it means a lot to her family. I only wish Alice herself could see this outpouring of love and respect for all that she represented. I hope we can carry her example back into our day-to-day lives.
The last time I saw Alice, she asked how I was doing. And I told her that I was thoroughly enjoying being 3,000 miles from Washington. She gave me that wonderful smile and said, "Please take me with you." I've been reluctant to come back to Washington as often as I did in the past because I thought at some point I might wind up jumping in the Potomac. The truth is there are two people that could bring me back to Washington. One was Alice, and the other's Belle Sawhill. At OMB, I learned to never say no to either of them. And that's why I'm honored to be here today. First of all, Sylvia and I want to convey our deepest condolences to the Winter and Rivlin families. I'm sure that you, like all of us, thought that Alice would always be around, forever fighting for what she believed was right for our country. She gave so much to improving this city and our nation. Washington will just not be the same without Alice Rivlin. I first met her close to 50 years ago at the old Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. She was an assistant secretary for planning and evaluation, and I had just become a special assistant to the new secretary of HEW, Bob Finch. This is in early 1969. Alice immediately impressed all of us with her wonderful mind and her heart. I later became director of the U.S. Office for Civil Rights with the responsibility of enforcing equal education laws in the wake of Brown versus the Board of Education. It was a tough job, and it was not made any easier by the Nixon administration's embrace of the Southern strategy. Alice knew the pressures I was under and supported my decision to continue to enforce the law as I thought it should be enforced. It eventually cost me my job, but Alice was one of the first people to come to my office and thank me for doing what was right, regardless of the politics. That is what I would call the Alice Rivlin Code of Conduct. I learned it from her, and she taught it to a lot of willing and unwilling students of politics in what was then a very male-dominated Washington, D.C. Although she was a Democrat, she was bipartisan at heart and willing to encourage and support all of those, regardless of party, who were willing to stand up and do the right thing, particularly when it came to fiscal policy. Throughout her life, she fought for fiscal responsibility and expressed strong views about the failure of political leadership to make the tough decisions necessary for our country and for our economy. That is what made her an outstanding candidate to become the first director of the newly created Congressional Budget Office in 1975. The Senate Budget Chair, I think it was Senator Muskie at the time, recommended her appointment. But the House Budget Chair, Al Ullman, was strongly opposed to picking a woman. However, when Wilbur Mills, the chairman of Ways and Means, lost his job after he jumped into the tidal basin with an Argentine stripper, Ullman took Mills' position as chair of Ways and Means. And the new chairman of the Budget Committee, Brock Adams, supported Alice for CBO. She always enjoyed reminding us that she owed her job to Fannie Fox. As CBO director, Alice was tough and direct, and as Bell pointed out, always spoke truth to power. As a new member of the Budget Committee, I always admired her forthright testimony, telling committee chairmen and their committees that they had a responsibility to abide by budget constraints. It was a picture I will never forget. 5'2", Alice Rivlin, with her chin just above the witness chair, leaning forward on both elbows right into the mic, lecturing the likes of Dan Rostenkowski and Jamie Whitten and Billy Ford and Bob Gimo and Bob Byrd and others about restraints on spending. She was, in every sense of the word, a fiscal suffragette. When President Clinton selected me as director of the Office of Management and Budget, and I must say to all of you that the President asked that I convey his regards and condolences to the family. He had a deep feeling of loss when Alice passed. At the time, both President Clinton and myself agreed that Alice should serve as my deputy at OMB. And in all of those difficult negotiations within the new administration to develop the president's landmark first budget, I can't tell you how helpful Alice was in standing firm and convincing the president and his economic team that tough decisions on deficit reduction needed to be made for the sake of a strong economy. And we made tough decisions on entitlement spending, on discretionary spending, on defense spending, and on taxes. When that budget finally passed by one vote in the House and in the Senate, Alice and I felt a deep sense of relief that all of those past budget fights had finally paid off. And when a balanced federal budget was finally achieved, I know there are a lot of politicians, past and present, who take credit for that. But the reality is that were it not for the persistence, the guidance, and the dedication of Alice Rivlin, it would have never happened. Alice went on to become director of OMB. When I became the president's chief of staff, and I asked her to be part of my early morning staff meetings. I think they occurred at 7 a.m. each morning. And again, in a room full of male egos, presidential aides and advisors, Rahm Emanuel, George Stephanopoulos, Harold Ickes, Bob Rubin, Larry Summers, and of course myself. She never hesitated to speak up and express her views, whether they agreed with her or not. They always respected what Alice had to say. She was, as always, tough, direct, and spoke truth to power. In recent years, we continued to work together. She came to the Panetta Institute as a lecturer on the economy. We honored her with our Jefferson Lincoln Award for bipartisan leadership. She spoke to our congressional interns. We did panels on fiscal responsibility, and we were part of the committee for a responsible federal budget, fighting again the same battles we had fought for over 50 years. Needless to say, we are both discouraged that neither the president nor the leadership in Congress are willing to do what is necessary, willing to make the tough decisions for the health of our nation. It is hard to believe that we've gone from a balanced budget and a surplus to a $22 trillion debt and a $1 trillion deficit. Indeed, that was the subject of the book that she worked on when she died. As I said, Washington and the nation will miss Alice. Washington will be a sadder place without her spunk and her spirit and her will to fight. But the memory of her courage will never die. And perhaps that memory can inspire future generations of leaders, as it did those of us who had the privilege of knowing her, that we will never forget the code she established. Fight for what is right, regardless of politics. It is a lesson our country needs to learn now more than ever. God bless you, Alice. And we pray that there are no budget deficits in heaven, because God will be in for a hell of a lot of trouble.
So my name is Douglas Rivlin. I'm Alice's youngest. I'm her baby. I see a lot of people actually who knew me as Dougie originally, and for everyone here, if you want to call me Dougie from now on, that's fine. Just show proof that you were here. Before I read my thing, I want to say a few thank yous. First, to Georgetown for hosting us in this beautiful space. My mom loved teaching, and she loved teaching here, and she loved being at the McCourt School in Georgetown. So thank you very much for opening this wonderful hall up to us. I graduated from high school right here, and so did my brother. In fact, he sang a song right there. And my mom spoke at his graduation, and she killed. I also want to thank our wonderful choir. They're comprised of current and former members of the Choral Arts Society of Washington, and I especially want to thank Rob Vogel, who's a longtime friend of the family's and recruited the folks to come today, and we really appreciate that. Weren't they wonderful? And our heartfelt thanks goes to the Brookings Institution for helping us organize today's celebration, and especially to Camilo Ramirez and Ariel Metzger. Their hard work is deeply appreciated by my family and by me. So thank you. After my mom passed, Sid and I reached out to Representative Donna Shalala and Mayor Tony Williams and Belle Sawhill and asked for their help in planning this event, and we are forever thankful for their generosity in helping us with that. Our challenge was to come up with a ceremony that did justice to all the many facets of my mom's life and career and have it last less than about 12 hours. We wanted to capture her long and storied professional career, her love of country and for Washington, D.C. We wanted to capture her friendships and her many people that she invited into her life and her many random acts of kindness. And we also wanted to of course, we wanted to do justice to her as a trailblazer in terms of being a trailblazing woman in American politics and policy, but also in terms of being an actual trailblazer, you know, for like trails, up a mountain or skiing or running or canoeing, all the things that she did in her outdoor life. She would hate us making a big fuss over her. She would probably object to all of you taking off work today as well. My mom taught me a lesson that later my boss, my mentor, Marian Wright Edelman, put into words for me that had been handed down through her family. And Marian Edelman likes to say, service is the rent you pay for living. And Mom, you paid a lot of rent. So we're making a fuss, sorry. All of us loved you very much, and we're all immensely proud of you, and what a life well lived. And the last thing that I wanted to say about my mom, raising 3 kids in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, is to point out that behind Alice was another group of women helping her watch after her kids while she was out balancing the budget or figuring out how to, afford more health care for people. There were folks watching after us. And so women like Jackie Jones and Gwen Ford, Artie Bullock and Essie Hicks helped my mom be the super mom that she was. And I'm glad that Jackie and Gwen are going to be with us this weekend. I always try to be the man that they and my mom and my dad and my family tried to raise me to be. And sometimes I'm actually able to rise up to that high standard. So before I end, I want to read what I came up here to read. We Remember Them was written by Sylvan Kamens and Rabbi Jack Reamer. At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of the autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us, and we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we will remember them. When we have joy and we crave to share it, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live, and they are now a part of us, and we remember them. Thank you very much.
I want to tell you a story about a report, an inexperienced researcher, which is me, and the feedback Alice gave me that I remember to this day. When I first started working for Alice at Brookings, I was fairly early in my career, and my first project was to manage a big report. I was fairly confident in my abilities to write and research on my own, but I hadn't been responsible for a project that included multiple co-authors at different organizations, a polling firm, an opinionated advisory board, and a rather hands-on funder. It was like it was custom designed to cause me angst. Coordinate and manage a team of researchers older and more experienced? Check. Make editorial decisions about things I didn't know that much about? Check. Manage disagreements about how to proceed? Check and check. Then one day, Alice called me into her office. I don't know what prompted her to call me, but my guess it was two things. Overhearing me talk to someone about the stressful issue of the day, which was probably blown out of proportion, and receiving one too many wishy-washy emails from me masquerading as project management. So I grabbed my notepad and headed over, pretty sure I had done something wrong, or perhaps many, many things wrong. I sat down at the little round table in her office, and I readied myself. She said, "Martha, you are doing a wonderful job, but you need to learn to use your backbone." Use your backbone. From another person in another tone of voice, that phrase could have been condescending or snide or mean. But from Alice, it was empowering. Her message was, "We hired you for a reason. You can do this. Don't worry so much about what other people think. What do you think?" With her characteristic insight, she cut right to the heart of the matter. I worked for her for many years subsequently, and I always strove to live up to her confidence in me. I will be forever grateful that I had the chance to walk alongside her.
I am from Milledgeville, Georgia. When I arrived at the Brookings Institution in 1990 as Alice Rivlin's research assistant, I had barely heard of her, the Brookings Institution, and I barely knew what a think tank was. The person I came to know, respect, and love had great respect for everyone she encountered. Alice tried to identify the best and who they were and the ideas they tried to convey. She had me attend meetings with her because she knew that I was an aspiring economist, but I had no idea about the role economists played in shaping policy at all levels in Washington, D.C. One memorable meeting captures this perfectly. Alice headed the Rivlin Commission to assess the financial situation of the District of Columbia. I helped to finalize the report, and Alice generously invited me along to present it to the person who commissioned the study, the late Mayor Marion Barry. I was both excited and nervous to see Alice at work and to see her in conversation with one of the most controversial political figures in America. Upon arriving in City Hall for the meeting, I noticed I forgot essential equipment for an RA, pen and paper. Panicked, I looked around the room to see if there were any pads and pens lying around. I had no such luck, and I was too embarrassed to ask Alice for a pen. I had one job as an RA, which was to take meticulous notes of the proceedings. And I was sure I was about to be fired by this famous economist I barely knew, in front of the famous mayor everyone knew. She showed great compassion and offered me a pen and a look that said, "I expect you to take good notes." It may have seemed like a small gesture, but she expected me to have the competence and exude the confidence she did, no matter what the problem or task. She had high expectations for everyone around her, and it was the first time I started taking myself seriously as a future economist. Marion Barry was engaged and peppered Alice with precise, thoughtful questions. He clearly held Alice in the highest regard and listened intently to her answers. It was apparent she respected his questions and the multidimensional problems he faced as a mayor of a city with unique financing constraints. She answered each question carefully, thoroughly, and with compassion. And that's who the consummate economist, problem solver, policymaker, mentor, and friend was. Now, as the director of the program that inspires and prepares students to pursue economics as a profession, I can only hope to follow in her footsteps and to do any one of these jobs well. Thank you.
A home-cooked meal of soup dumplings and Chinese stir-fries brought Alice into my life. It was 1987, and I was a student at Harvard's Kennedy School and taking a class on federal budget and macroeconomic policy. Alice was the instructor. My roommate, who's here, and I discovered she lived in Soldiersville Park dorms. Would it be okay to invite the renowned professor over for dinner? Let's ask her and see, we thought. She actually said yes, and the rest is history. Over the course of the next 3+ decades, I had many, many more meals with Alice, including the precious moments with her family on Christmas Eves. And when I became a mother, I brought my daughter along. She also joined in the special holidays, and I brought other members of the family as well. We are family, and in those moments of togetherness as a wife, mother, grandmother, and friend, Alice gave so much of herself to all of us, and that's what she loved most. I remember my first job offer in Washington as a budget examiner in the environment branch at OMB. I was trained as a environmental sanitary engineer, and I wanted to help shape environmental policy. I had this notion that a Republican administration would not want to increase funding for environmental programs, that I would be asked to cut the very programs that I had come to Washington to help shape. I asked for a lunch date with Alice, who is always so willing to take the time to give me advice on both personal and professional growth. Her advice, which is a signature mark of her impactful career, is that no matter which party had the White House, the skills I would learn as a budget examiner at OMB would be invaluable, and I can be an impact. I went on to have 4 stints at OMB, one of which was to be her special assistant when she became director of OMB. With those skills, I went on to become a budget expert, taking on various political appointments in the Clinton and Obama administration, and career ones during the 2 Bush administrations. Alice always had a way of making you believe you could do more than you thought you could do. She believed so deeply in the people around her that she gave us the confidence to believe in ourselves. There were many times when I was hopeless and even homeless once, where Alice actually gave me a place to stay and inspiration to get through another day. And other times, she motivated me towards bigger aspirations, professional ones. I wouldn't be the person I am today without Alice. In her example, I learned an important lesson, how to serve and lead with integrity. And one of the greatest joys and blessings of my life was to call Alice my teacher, my mentor, my advocate, my North Star, my family, and my friend.
Alice was my mentor, boss, colleague, co-author, and above all, my friend. For most of the world, she was a champion decathlete of public policy, excelling at every one of the diverse challenges she undertook, whether it was cabinet official, central banker, university educator, author of influential policy books, newspaper editorial writer, guardian of the district's fiscal rehabilitation, think tank executive, professional association president, or key member of efforts to craft bipartisan solutions to the nation's fiscal impasse. But her accomplishments in these challenging roles pale in comparison to the contribution she made to this nation as an institution builder, as the founding director of the Congressional Budget Office. Today, CBO is a strong, influential, objective voice informing Congress's and the nation's fiscal, economic, and policy debates. But that was not preordained by the language of the Congressional Budget Act, which left a great deal of latitude with respect to what CBO would become. Nor did the Senate and House Budget Committees agree on the functions of the new agency. While the House envisioned a small organization with a narrow scope, little independent visibility, the Senate had more expansive views, but assumed committee staff would exert strong guidance. Alice's initial challenge was not just to define the new agency. She confronted many more mundane, practical problems as well. CBO at its start was homeless. It had no offices. It had no way to order equipment, let alone to mail a letter. The media besieged Alice with interview requests. She needed to pay courtesy visits to dozens of Hill power brokers. Hundreds of job seekers sought to convince her that they were just the right one for one of the high-level positions that CBO would have to fill. At the same time, she was trying to define the new agency's vision and organizational structure, hire a top-notch staff, and produce analyses that Congress found useful. Alice kept her sense of humor throughout this period of adversity, as illustrated when a well-dressed man found the large borrowed room we camped out in for CBO's first couple of days. The room contained only 2 large desks, Alice's beneath the windows at the far end, and mine just inside the door. This job seeker entered and requested an appointment with Alice. When I explained that she was booked solid for the next few weeks, he said that he had to see her soon because he was leaving DC the next day. He explained that, as I said, he was leaving and had to see her soon. Realizing that he wasn't going to get anywhere with me, the man turned and repeated his request to Alice, who'd been walking from her desk to mine with a pad of paper and a pen in her hand. He mistook her for a secretary. Without missing a beat, Alice thanked him for his interest, took down his contact information, and assured him that being such a good friend with Alice, she was sure Alice would want to get back to him in short order. When I asked her afterwards why she hadn't identified herself, she said she didn't want to embarrass the well-meaning job seeker. That's just who Alice was, a nice person, really, to everybody. With space being in short supply on Capitol Hill, it was a week before CBO was given more permanent quarters in the basement of what was the Carroll Arms Hotel. The Senate Budget Committee occupied the floors above CBO. Alice's office was the former hotel bar. For the first few weeks, the basement had no heat in it, and it being early March, the offices were sometimes very cold, causing the secretaries to wear gloves when they typed. As she worked to define CBO, Alice frequently was battling with the Senate Budget Committee staff, who were above us physically, and they thought in other ways as well. One day, after a particularly difficult set of discussions, Alice returned to her office in the bar, plopped down in her chair, and began to tell me that she thought she had greatly irritated the committee staff. As she spoke, a waterfall of yellowish liquid began pouring down the wall behind her desk. She smiled and commented, "Well, I didn't think I pissed them off that much." She hadn't. The frozen, rusty pipes had burst as they thawed. With unclear guidance from the Budget Act and the Budget Committee's wrangling over just what CBO's roles should be, it was Alice's vision, good judgment, and courageous decisions that defined CBO and what it has become. While some thought CBO should be bipartisan, more like the Office of Technology Assessment, Alice was adamant that the agency would be nonpartisan. To that end, she insisted that the organization would not make policy or programmatic recommendations, which she rightly feared would only draw it into partisan policy disputes. She also felt strongly that CBO's scope should be very broad, encompassing all issues that affected the budget. This wasn't necessarily the view of even those who supported a more expansive CBO, as was illustrated by Chairman Muskie's reaction to CBO's first economic forecast. When he saw it, he called Alice and screamed, as only Ed Muskie could do, "Why the hell are you doing an economic forecast? We already have the President Ford's forecast, and CBOs will only confuse people." Alice calmly pointed out that the President's forecasts could be biased and intended to make the administration's policies look good. Certainly, Congress should want to base its budget decisions on its own objective, independent forecasts. Alice insisted that the CBO's analysis and methodologies be transparent as possible, and to hew to the consensus views of academics and other outside experts. To this end, she convened advisory panels that encompassed a wide range of perspectives. She was also adamant that CBO's message be communicated in ways that members, the media, and the public could understand. No jargon, no fancy equations, and above all, clear writing. She read and provided detailed comments on drafts of every report, often calling for major revisions. For many senior analysts, this was the first time since high school that they had been subjected to a seminar on how to write clearly, something about which Alice, from her stints as an editorial writer for the Washington Post and the LA Times, was passionate about. Alice also cared deeply about the morale and well-being of the staff. She met briefly with every new hire to share her vision of CBO's mission and its values, and to get to know a little bit about each employee. She also conducted exit interviews to gain insight on how CBO could be made better. Her interest in the staff was evident when it came time to renovate CBO's new home in the Ford office building. Alice's initial office, with its private bathroom, was in the corner of the building closest to the Capitol, but it was furthest away from most of the staff. She insisted that her new office in the new plan be more centrally located where she could bump into staff more frequently. When told that it would be very difficult to put the plumbing in for an executive bathroom in the central location, she responded that sharing the staff's ladies' room would give her even more opportunity to interact informally with the female staff who she cared about greatly. But no good deed goes unpunished. Because Alice and the junior staff did not always make small talk easily, some of the women put together a little pamphlet for their colleagues entitled "Topics to Talk to the Director About in the Ladies' Room." While in recent years the congressional budget process has struggled to meet even the minimal aspirations of the framers of the Budget Act, CBO has far exceeded expectations, largely because of Alice's farsighted vision, her inspirational leadership, and the many courageous decisions she made during those early years of CBO. CBO has transformed the way Congress and the executive branch discuss budgets, fiscal policy, and the economy. It has enhanced the media's ability to cover these complex issues and help the public better understand the challenges that this nation faces. For all of this and more, the nation and all of us in this room should be profoundly grateful to Alice and her contributions. Thank you.
I'm going to follow my brother Doug's lead, and well, Rob and his very good and very talented friends are leaving the stage, and I'm going to jump right in. I'm Kathy Rivlin. I'm the only one of Alice's 3 children who's older than Barbie. Mom was a professional question answerer. That really tied together all the many careers she had. It was one of her superpowers. She knew her facts, and she knew why you would ask the question you had asked. This wasn't just luck. It wasn't just instinct. She prepared meticulously, because just about every question and answer had the potential to affect the quality of people's lives. If you came down to breakfast early, you would sometimes hear her working through her prep. She was really smart and really funny, but not everybody knows that. There are lots of ways to answer every question. And sometimes, and you'll never hear a specific one from me, if you came down early enough, you'd hear that sassy, smart answer she would love to give in public, but never did. Her key was providing the information necessary to make a rational decision about public policy and applying her strategic filters. She would work through those early in the morning. It was important to be kind. It was very important to advance the conversation so that the conversation would continue. She never ended a relationship by making a smart-ass remark. So she would pose various questions to the dog and then answer them. You know, talking to yourself is actually a sign of higher intelligence, or so my mother always told herself. As she set out the cereal and the juice, she would sometimes start with that obvious, funny, snappy response, but quickly hone in on the answer that advanced policymaking and relationship building and nonpartisanship and bipartisanship and all the things she was committed to. I'm here to read a poem. We're in an academic setting. This is a poem about all the possible answers to a question. It is written by Tom Wayman. It's a poem that my mother sent me on one of my brief side hustle forays into law teaching. And it considers the possible answers to the question a student might ask a professor the first day back after missing a class. The question is, did I miss anything? Nothing. When we realized you weren't here, we sat with our hands folded on our desks in silence for the full 2 hours. Everything. I gave an exam worth 40% of the grade for this term and assigned some reading due today, on which I'm about to hand out a quiz worth 50%. Nothing. None of the content of this course has value or meaning. Take as many days off as you like. Any activities we undertake as a class, I assure you, will not matter either to you or me and are without purpose. Everything. A few minutes after we began last time, a shaft of light suddenly descended, and an angel or other heavenly being appeared and revealed to us what each woman or man must do to attain divine wisdom in this life and the hereafter. This is the last time the class will meet before we disperse to bring the good news to all people on earth. Nothing. When you are not present, how could anything significant occur? Everything contained in this classroom is a microcosm of human experience, assembled for you to query and examine and ponder. This is not the only time such an opportunity will be presented, gathered. But it was one place, and you weren't here.
Alice Rivlin wasn't just some callous budget maven or austere fiscal hawk who cared only about balanced budgets and financial austerity. No, she actually wanted government to work and investment to flow back into the district in order for the city to meet its responsibilities, to educate our children, to heal our sick, to protect our families, and to restore our community. Early in 1998, I was the district's independent chief financial officer on my way to visit the wizard, so to speak, to visit Alice at the Marble Temple of the Federal Reserve, where she was vice chair. Alice's reputation certainly had preceded her. She was only an acquaintance then, and yet I knew she was something special, a rare person of national prominence with real interest and expertise in local Washington. In 1990, as chair of the Rivlin Commission, she had laid out a diagnosis of the district's fiscal predicament, detailing how bad management and federal law created a perverse combination of extensive budget obligations without the resources to fund them. In 1994, as the first woman to direct the White House Office of Management and Budget, she worked with local leaders in the Congress to create the D.C. the D.C. Control Board to guide the district out of insolvency. Yes, the evil Control Board. With a backstop of the Control Board, we ended up cleaning up the district's books and balanced the budget 2 years ahead of schedule. On top of this, the work of the Rivlin Commission produced a blueprint for the district's Revitalization Act of 1997, a signal accomplishment of the Clinton administration that we miss nowadays. Actually, it's one of many things we forget about the Clinton administration, but that's another story. The Revitalization Act, in exchange for eliminating the yearly payment the city received from the federal government, relieved the district of responsibility for its federally mandated pension system, its court system, and the infamous Lorden Correctional Facility. So therefore, with all this in mind, on the day that I visited her, the future looked bright, and I was excited to tell her of my plans to run for DC mayor, and I hope get her support. But from the expression on her face, somebody shows up at your door with 7 jerk chicken, pineapple pizzas. She had this, did I order this look? As she looked at me, and she asked me, well, how did I think I could become mayor? And I did my Miss Marlon Brando imitation, and I said, I think I can be a contender, and that didn't really convince her. She looked at me as if I might as well have told her I was building a spaceship to Mars. She knew political ability. After all, she had worked closely with President Bill Clinton, one of the best political talents in a generation, and so necessarily she was quite skeptical of my political chops. But nevertheless, strangely enough, she didn't have her assistant interrupt us or beg off she didn't beg off due to an elective root canal. So in her own quiet way, assuming, she said, you can make this work, here are the problems the city faces. And what I saw in that person was, in physically diminutive form, a giant, a powerful, determined leader. For with a world of experience and an ace economist talent, she described nothing less than the economic future for the district and the way to get there. Alice and I quickly became working partners and good friends. She offered support upon my election in 1998 to revert government authority back to DC local government. She provided wise counsel during phone calls and her regular visits to my office to discuss fiscal matters, and yes, astronomy and her grandpa's career as a famous solar scientist. I had credibility with Alice because I had gone to the 1979 solar eclipse long before solar eclipses were fashionable. So to Alice, I had real credibility, baby, So she acted in many, many different ways to me as head coach, always asking questions, always urging me to think, and all of us to think boldly and sketch out an ambitious goal for many, many things, including 100,000 new residents as a way to begin restoring the district's economy and finances. Alice Rivlin was at once a fierce advocate and a gracious and attentive listener. She sat in countless meetings where DC officials and residents questioned her competence in government budgeting, I kid you not, all while giving each person the attention she would bestow on any central banker or senator or finance minister. She treated everyone with respect, whatever their station, whether they commanded it or not. And in the din of shouted voices and in the chaos of innumerable discussions and conflicting priorities, she never lost track of a goal. I saw this determination when she steadfastly supported our initiative to convert the subsidy for our failing public hospital into one of the country's first statewide health plans. And as a child who started life in the foster care system, I appreciated her deep understanding that the right budget choices and oversight would ultimately lead the district's public service agencies out of court receivership. Yes, it's tough being a city. An urban community travels a hard road, a rough road, and Alice Rivlin was a rare person who could turn vision into reality, and she got an often rowdy group of self-interested DC Pauls to see things we never imagined and performed in ways we never expected. We have lost her, but we have to press on without her. But because of her, we have never been better equipped to keep making progress on the road to that better place. Thank you, Alice. We love you.
All that I have, I would gladly give not to be here today. Today we celebrate the life of our friend Alice Rivlin, one of the greatest public servants of any age. But let me be really honest about her. I have been wetter, colder, more miserable, more terrified with Alice Rivlin than any other friend I have ever had. You learn a lot about people when you're inching across a narrow ledge in a rainstorm, or crossing a freezing glacier at night on some of the highest mountains of the world. Almost 50 years ago, my major professor in graduate school handed me a book which he described as the most important work on public policy I could read. It was, of course, Alice's now seminal work, published by Brookings, Systematic Thinking for Social Action. I finally met Alice in the late 70s when I came from New York to work in the Carter administration. I was thrilled. She was already famous and basically took me under her wing. She wanted all of us newcomers to love her adopted city as much as she did. I eventually returned to New York, and one day Alice called me and asked if I could take a month off to go to Kashmir to trek in the Himalayas. Up until then, my idea of being outdoors was the grass courts at Forest Hills. The Himalayas, what an adventure. The beginning of decades of trekking with friends and her very patient husband, Sid Winter, himself a world-class economist, in some of the most interesting places in the world. Once her fabulous children joined us in Peru, but that's a story for another time. Alice was tenacious and brave and cheerful and the smartest, nicest person I have ever known. She was also very funny. When I went to Wisconsin, she called me one day and said, "Do you have any visiting dogships?" I said, "You mean professorships?" She said, "For a semester." She said, no, dogships. She said, "I'm going to Harvard for a semester, and I need you to take my beagle for the semester." Of course, Alice, put him on a plane, send him out to Madison, Wisconsin. What she didn't tell me was this was a wandering beagle, used to checking out homes on the streets. That beagle cost me more money in police fines than his dog food. And when I finally returned him to Washington by plane, Doug Rivlin picked him up and sent Alice a message. "The beagle has landed." When I finally returned to Washington in the Clinton cabinet, Alice and her friend Meg Greenfield, the powerhouse editorial page of The Post, and Post publisher Katharine Graham formed something called the Smart Women's Club, that they invited me to join them in hilarious dinners with interesting guests. That was the high point of my tenure here. Alice was an intellectual giant with Midwestern sensibilities and a resume that will never be matched. Assistant Secretary for Policy and Evaluation at HEW, founding director of the Congressional Budget Office, director of the Office of Management and Budget, president of the American Economics Association, vice chair of the Federal Reserve. In between her government service, she sat on a very high perch at Brookings, producing books and articles that you've heard about on a wide range of federal policies that were rigorous and centrist and insightful. In her spare time, as Tony said, she was credited with saving DC from bankruptcy. She never forgot her responsibility to her beloved hometown. Deeply respected and beloved by her peers and politicians of both parties, she was also one of the first recipients of a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award, a tribute to her skill building one of the most important public institutions, the Congressional Budget Office, in our lifetime. I once gave her a picture of Fannie Fox, autographed. "Dear Alice," it said, "you're welcome. Love, Fannie." Alice's sustained contributions to public policy analysis has actually fundamentally shaped our thinking about the impact of public programs and the budget. She also constantly reminded us that when we refuse to use evidence in making policy decisions, we do so at our country's peril. Alice Rivlin was my dear friend. Her mentoring younger colleagues and helping people of all walks of life with their challenges was legendary. She gave so many a hand up. That is my memory of Alice. Crossing streams, jumping from wet rocks to get to the other side, or inching across a narrow, icy ridge. When one of our staff offered her a hand, she always waved them off, sometimes irritably. She never, in all the years that I knew her, asked for help. Even in the end, all she wanted to do was to finish her book. Alice believed that she was blessed and that others needed that helping hand, sometimes hers, and more often government's. This was more than a life well lived. Alice Rivlin was a patriot who loved her country and her city and served both with extraordinary skill and passion.
I'm Alan Rivlin, and today my heart is full with love and pride for my mother and the example she set in her professional life for women in public policy, for women in government, and especially for public policy in government. There will be a separate event to honor Mom's private side, and I'm delighted that the lines between public and private are getting blurred in others' remembrances today. But let's be honest. If you knew Alice Rivlin and loved her like family, you knew that half of every deep conversation was going to be about politics, government, and public policy. Half the conversation would be, are you happy? Are you healthy? Are you getting enough exercise? Are you getting enough sleep? And in recent years, those questions went in both directions. Plus, there was checking in on family members, discussing new TV shows and books. But the rest of the conversation would be, what do you think about the latest news, followed by a high-level, detailed, challenging, skeptical discussion of current events and politics. Mom defined herself through her opposition to two things, hyperpartisanship and populism, which pretty much defines our current political environment. You could say she declared war on populism when she wrote Systematic Thinking for Social Action in 1970, where she made the case for the new analytical tools employed by the quiet revolution of increasing public policy professionalism in government. If populism is defined as public distrust of public policy elites, Alice Rivlin was a lifelong proponent of developing and cultivating elitely capable public policy professionals and trusting their expertise. At the end of her life, Alice was frustrated and concerned by the rise of populism on both the left and the right, both domestically and internationally. But she didn't blame the populists. She felt somewhat responsible for them, and she blamed hyperpartisanship, because hyperpartisanship has made the US government pathologically dysfunctional, and government dysfunction fertilizes the ground for populism. Although ever the optimist, and we'll get to that in a minute, Alice was distressed about many unresolved pressing problems that would outlive her, becoming the responsibility of the generations of her children and grandchildren. Man-made global climate change is a really big problem. So is our broken immigration system. And with our tremendous underinvestment in basic infrastructure, government at all levels is failing this most basic test. In honor of Mayor Bowser, I want to accept present cities from that statement. The economy is failing to raise the incomes of most workers and create high-paying jobs in the heartland. The federal budget deficit is massive and growing just as baby boomers are entering their golden years. There's probably no issue that is more central to her public career, but deficits were not Alice Rivlin's highest priority at the end of her life, nor was economic insecurity, economic inequality, or infrastructure, or immigration, or climate change, nor winning the next election. None of these were Alice Rivlin's highest priority at the end of her life. She was focused on the complete breakdown of public policy making in Washington due to hyperpartisanship. This was her highest priority at the end of her days because real solutions to all these other problems are available, but just not possible in the current hyperpartisan political power standoff. At the end, Mother was completely focused on completing her final book, titled Divided We Fall, The Case for Consensus. And let me tell you, and I have a lot of witnesses on this, she was facing her illness with this as her reason to fight. She was answering every medical question with her own question: what will give me the most time to finish the book? She did not have enough time. But I am here to announce that the Rivlin Winter family and the Brookings Institution are committed to completing the book on schedule. Mother did not view the latest chapter drafts as final, but she spent many hours as she could manage in the final days, telling her grandson, Caleb Jones, my wife and her daughter-in-law, Sherry Rivlin, and me exactly what she believed needed to be added and changed. We have lots of notes, and we have much of this tape recorded. And with the support of some of her esteemed colleagues and friends, all heavy hitters, most of them women, we have enough to complete the task. In her final days, she had an insight that had not yet made it into the book, and she repeated it over and over. It was basically a final plea, intended for the Washington policy establishment. Good, you're all here. She said, it's not so much about changing the tone in Washington as it is about changing the rules. When there's a tragedy or a funeral, people often say there's a change in tone in Washington for a week or two. Partisan attacks are out of fashion, and members of Congress talk about the need to put partisan differences aside and get things done. It's also a popular theme in State of the Union speeches. But no major piece of legislation has been passed and signed into law in years because the rules of the House and Senate and the incentives for the leadership of both parties is toward partisan warfare and against any compromise with the other side. And here I'm basically just repeating, with the aid of the tape recordings that we had, what she was saying over and over in her final days. Party leaders have taken control of the congressional agenda and have learned to use the rules to block legislation. Tight leadership control of the agenda in the Senate and the Hastert rule in the House have made it all but impossible to pass legislation that has majority bipartisan support. With complete faith that the next election will render the other side powerless, compromise is unnecessary and counterproductive to the message. But the result is that nobody wins. The leaders that are willing to work across party lines rarely get to see their legislation become law, but the same is true for the hyperpartisans, because the winning side has less power than they expected, and the losing side has enough power to resist and block progress. So her plea was to make having a minimally functioning government a priority and to work to solve the problem by building support for changes in the rules in the House and Senate and the incentives for the party leaders. Since the 2008 economic crisis, she said, regular order has disappeared and been replaced by partisan warfare that has kept us from doing anything pragmatic and sensible about the major challenges to our future. And then, changing register to her serious voice, we are choosing failure over success. If it is not possible to pass legislation that is supported by the majority of the public and the majority of their elected representatives in both chambers of Congress, then it will not be possible to do anything meaningful about climate change or immigration or to create better paying jobs in the heartland or rein in the deficit. The next election is not going to solve this problem because the last election did not cause it. This is a Washington problem that Washington has to solve. And as I noted, Mother was an optimist and a problem solver, and she took a lot of comfort from the real progress made by the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House at the end of last year when they reached a deal with then incoming Speaker Nancy Pelosi to break the gridlock by giving members the power to move broadly supported bills to the floor. This small but significant change in the rules in the right direction went largely unnoticed in the press, but it gave Alice hope that what she believed was the nation's biggest challenge could be met. Mother regretted that she could not be here to see it through. That was what she wanted to say with her final breaths, to invite all of you to join her in this crusade to put the fun back in minimally functional federal government. Mom, I hope I've delivered your message faithfully, and I'll conclude with a quote from Rumi. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I will meet you there.
Good afternoon. I am Sid Winter, Alice's husband of approximately the past 30 years. I'd like to acknowledge Lou Rivlin, her first husband, and the father of her children, who is here today with members of his family. I want to express my personal thanks to all of the participants and the organizers of this fine event. That includes the distinguished speakers, the remarkable mentee trio, the uplifting voices of the singers, and also the many people behind the scenes who have made great contributions by working hard and thinking carefully about this event and its meaning. Mindful of my own place in the program, I have, of course, wondered whether there would be anything left to say. Much has been said, and well said, about Alice. I have also read a lot of beautiful condolence notes in the past weeks. It is not exactly fun to read condolence notes that wonderfully evoke your late life partner. It tends to bring on my allergic symptoms. But reading those notes is nevertheless a positive experience, and the themes expressed in them have been beautifully evoked again today. I would like to thank the authors of those notes, many of whom are with us today. The great overriding and quite apparent truth is everybody met the same Alice. What is left to say about her that has not been said, or said as clearly as it should have been? I will have to reach for some sort of an answer to that. Alice had irrepressible optimism, great energy, and strong personal discipline. These had as a corollary an enormous resilience. I remember following her up a hill on a bushwhack hike, meaning a hike guided by animal trails or by none at all. This was on one of our wilder wilderness adventures, and that hike was part of an improvised response to avoid a threat of untimely death in an Arctic river. A river that was found to be running unexpectedly high, and thus made our canoes too risky. There's a long story there for sure. But back to the bushwhack. I remember she was wearing her purple long johns. Why she chose that costume for this drama remains beyond me. Anyway, I was personally energized by the challenge of following my beautiful purple quarry up that hill. There she went through the brush and the brambles in her purple long johns, and I was a step behind. We got over the hill, and ultimately, we got home. Alice and I were both Midwesterners and both economists. We had similar views on a lot of things, but fortunately, not identical views. One of the minor things we shared was our taste in TV commercials. We mostly hated them, of course. But we loved a few, such as the Geico Gecko in his best days. And similarly, the E-Trade Baby, a neoclassical economist if there ever was one. One commercial that I personally had great enthusiasm for was the Energizer Bunny. I'm not sure Alice shared that enthusiasm, and I don't think I ever explained my own enthusiasm to her. Now, Alice didn't have a bass drum, wasn't noisy, wasn't pink, and definitely wasn't the bunny, whatever your connotations with that might be. But it was the going, going, going part that had me from the start and reminded me of someone I knew. Somebody who, for most of her 88 plus years, ran on batteries much stronger than any made by Energizer or anybody else. There was a stretch of road near St. Albans, Vermont, that we frequently traveled during our summer vacation, or more accurately, our summer displacement to Vermont, because Alice was never thoroughly on vacation except on some of those treks. On this road, there was formerly some sort of Energizer installation, which was well marked by a sign featuring the famous bunny. Every time we passed that bunny sign, I would smile and think about the person in the passenger seat next to me. Going, going, going. She was, even on our vacation, though now she was going to take a break to join me in the grocery shopping. Before I close, I have one announcement. The details are in your program. Here's the guidance. I would like to invite you all to join us outside for a reception. Please head down to the first floor, turn left down the long hallway. Staff will be available there to help direct you. Now I faced up to the challenge of my closing words. I offer these words in the spirit of our celebration of Alice's life, and also seeking to say now what may not have been adequately said or intimated already. I hope that you will receive these words and smile, and yet I sense I may have to struggle to get them out. The allergy symptoms again. So here are my words, only 7 in number. Alice really had a lot of fun.